Hi, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Maddie, and I'm a summer program assistant here at the Fine Arts Work Center. And most of you are here because you're participating in one of our amazing summer workshops, so you already know what's going on tonight. But for those of you who aren't, for 9 weeks every summer, the Work Center hosts week-long open enrollment visual arts and writing workshops. If anyone here is interested in learning more, you can ask me or any of the staff on hand after this event. If you're here longer than this week, you should really think about taking one of our workshops. I promise you won't regret it. One of our favorite parts of our summer programs is that every week our incredible faculty mesmerize our audiences with presentations and talks. Tonight we're going to hear from two really great faculty members, poets Andrea Cohen and Tina Chang. Andrea and Tina will both read from their work, and they will then conduct a joint Q&A with the audience. So before we begin, a few items of housekeeping and other items of interest. Books by both speakers tonight will be available for sale at the back of the room, and they will also be signing their books at the back of the room after the event. Books by other members of this year's faculty will also be for sale in our bookstore and at the back of the room, as well as some very pretty Falk merchandise, so be sure to check that out. The new Hudson D. Walker Gallery will be open after the event, and right now we're showing an amazing exhibit called Density's Glitch, which features work by former Falk Fellows. The proceeds of all work sold will go to support Falk's programs, so be sure to check it out after this event. If you're taking a writing class this week, please consider signing up to read at Student Night on Thursday. The sign-up sheet is in the student lounge across the courtyard. I would also like to give a big shout out to East End Books, who've helped us stock and set up our bookstore. Restrooms are located down the hall behind you to your left. And finally, please do us all a favor and turn your cell phones to silent. We'll begin with Andrea Cohen. Andrea is a returning member of the Falk Summer faculty and is teaching a workshop this week titled The Long and Short of It, Expansion and Distillation. Andrea is the author of 7 collections of poetry, including, most recently, Everything and Nightshade. The recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and several residencies at MacDowell, she directs the Blacksmith House Poetry Series in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Guardian has praised her unique poetry, noting that an interesting blend of gravity and wit comes naturally to her, and that her readers enjoy her wit, whimsy, and truth small and large. Let's give a warm welcome to Andrea Cohen.
How's the sound? It's okay. My truths will be small this evening and short. How's that? I want to thank David and Sarah and Maddie and everyone here at the Fine Arts Work Center and all of you all for being here as well. I do have to wonder if they ever introduce, these are some of our so-so faculty members. You don't have any? Okay. They have to say that. And I'm really happy to be reading with Tina this evening. And it's a pleasure to be with so many poets I admire this week. And I mean that, the ones who are teaching the classes and the ones who are also in the classroom as students. And I count myself in both roles there. This is a poem called Major to Minor. Trains jump tracks, and people from steep trestles leap. But mostly, it's the subtler shifts that hit us hard. The key to the city not quite fitting. The epiphany of twin beds where there was one. Like 2 icebergs, no July knows what to do with. Division of. You took the painting of the girl on the stair. You left the stair. You took the nail on which the girl in a pink haze hung. You left the hole in horsehair plaster and the crumbling that comes after. Nightshade. It trades in poison and in balms. We call it bittersweet. What living isn't? I have to pay for every word, which is why they're very small. These poems. Declarative. I give you broken things, so you won't ask, will this break? Stationery. In the stationery store, he asks for the sort of pencil that's mostly eraser. What do you call that, he asks. And the clerk isn't sure whether he means, what do you call that sort of pencil, or what do you call the desire for it? But she understands what's behind the question. And behind her counter, there's a room where quietly they erase each other. This is called, sometimes the titles are longer than the poems. It's not hard to do. To the woman going up the escalator at Columbus Circle at 5:30 last evening. You were holding a fortunate orchid. I was not the slob standing beside you. I was the slob behind, one who'd live happily on half an ice cube now and again to ascend once to a blue moon with you. On divinity. I believe in divine intervention. When the gods rush past, I tackle them. Okay. There's a lot of very small poems in that book. These will be epics in comparison. This is called, I forgot to time myself because I can't read for more than an hour and a half. I know that. Okay. This is called Wrecking Ball. Its offices are thin air. On days off, it still goes in. Wrecking balls are workaholics. They hang around up there, and even the idea of big sky crumbles. Desert Isle. If I have to go there, I'd like a phone book I can sit on a chair. I'd like to believe I'm a child someone comes back for. Some of you remember telephone books. Some of you remember chairs. This is called Everything. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, Kurt Vonnegut said. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, the girl slurred to the artist at the tattoo parlor. The word made flesh isn't fictional. It's beautiful. It hurts. After the accident, we had the phrase, after the accident. Also this, before the accident. We had a drawer marked before and after and before happenings, we'd add atrocities and incidents, and the wild asters someone before and after keeps leaving. This is called Shiva. Evenings we sit in the living room together. Friday, I take my mother's slot, noon, at the beauty salon. Ruth, who for 40 years washed her hair, washes mine. We're all in the desert together. Your mother liked the water cold, Ruth says. News to me. From 1,000 mouths our dead assemble. Love. It's an extreme sport, like indoor beekeeping. That's true. That's a true story. I know it's true. I have stings. Okay. This is called Seaside. Before the day at the beach, we scouted out the day at the beach because nothing happens without planning. Because we had to plant the sand and the idea of happiness. We had to haul in the water. All our pleasures were forays into wilds, were carry in and out, like our bodies, which glistened and were gone. And that seems like just a good moment to read my PhD thesis. No, I don't have I don't have a PhD or a thesis, but I've been coming to Provincetown since the summer of Provincetown and then Truro and Wellfleet since the summer of 1986. And that's when I answered an ad in the Phoenix, if some of you remember the Phoenix. And you remember answering ads, what we used to do. And so for 6 months in Mayflower Heights, I rented a house for $500. And this was, if you know Mayflower Heights, Varjan Bogosian had 2 houses up there. There were 6 houses, and this was one of the houses up there. And one year, and I was renting with strangers, and one of them one summer was me, and another person was named Andrea Cohen, and she's now an attorney, and she's continues to be smaller than I am, and she had a very tall girlfriend named Carol, and I remember they were going to have July 4th at the beach, but before they went, a couple days before they went to scout everything out, and just to get the lay of the land, and that's where that poem comes from. And I have friends here from 40 years ago and from 30 years ago, and I mean in this room now, so that means something to me. This place does as well. So I'm going to read a couple more poems from here, and then maybe a couple new poems. This is called, I'm going to read a couple new poems, and I'll finish with one there. This is called Snake Handler. At last I understand what I was afraid of. Looking down at my 2 hands, having nothing else to be afraid of. Keepsake. She gave me nothing. Nothing lasts. Matinee. Today the part of love will be played by regret. Memory will be played by what if. Tragedy by the saxophonist. Silence will be played by silence. There will be no intermission. Losing my religion. The truth is, I left it on the bus on purpose because I saw someone else's religion there and didn't want it to be lonely. The truth is, you should never begin anything with the truth is, because then people will think everything else you were saying was false. The truth is, all I wanted was this, to fall asleep with you at the bus station, still holding our coffee cups, still holding our scepters. Nécessaire. Every Catherine Deneuve has one. Colette had 2 toothbrushes in hers, scissors, a clip-on grin. French women understand what's essential, what you need to wake up on the right side of Bedlam. A pencil, an eraser. Colette's nécessaire was small and blue, a soupçon of ocean you could tie your life raft to. I'll read one more and then one more from this book. Dinosaurs in my head. How did they get there? They heard the word extinction, and being wise creatures decided to hide where fire and ice, where time couldn't find them. And I'll read one more poem. Let's see. And I will thank you for being here too. Hmm. 11. It's the 11th hour on the 11th floor. We chose this apartment, if not this hour, for the light, though my father could from any height look back. Below are oaks and magnolias and tracks on which freight and passenger trains pass, and my father knows the difference by the blowing of their horns, both of which he prefers, he says, to that other one he's hearing, by which he means Gabriel's, disguised as tinnitus. He's remembering also, since it's fall, the shofar Herb Carp blew for the new year. A sorrowing sound, he always said, especially if you were a ram. That day we moved him from the split level to the 11th floor, we brought a few photographs and chairs, lamps to see the dark with, spoons, a cup. It was a kind of sky burial. He has his pocket comb. He has his wristwatch with the busted strap. He has his wallet with $1. He's getting smaller and smaller, his vast past vaster. Looking out from the 11th hour is like looking from a hole punched to make a room into a camera obscura. Anything can be a camera. Anyone might be in this area, but today it's us, watching on the compact TV what he watched, wrapped at the Imperial Theater in 1936. Buster Crabbe as Flash Gordon, trying to stop the planet Mongo from colliding with Earth. I forget how it ends, my father says, but it ends. And then we're looking from the small screen out the sliding glass toward dusk, where below us on fluted Spanish roofs, 2 men in straw hats are ambling the inclines of tiles without ropes or harnesses, without fear. One man is tossing bottles of water to the other, who's smoking a cigarette and catching the bottles, and I'm thinking danger and OSHA and laborers in the vineyard, and my father from his 11th hour says, lucky devils. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was really beautiful. Next, we're going to hear from poet Tina Chang. Tina is also a returning member of the Fox Summer Faculty and is teaching a workshop this week called Luminous Wreckage, Writing Your Way Back to Being. Tina, who is the Brooklyn Poet Laureate, is the author of Half-Lit Houses, of Gods and Strangers, and most recently Hybrida, which was named a most anticipated book of 2019 by NPR, LitHub, The Millions, Oprah Magazine, Publishers Weekly, and was named a New York Times Book Review New and Noteworthy collection. She's also the co-editor of the W. Norton anthology, Language for a New Century, Contemporary Poetry from the Middle East, Asia, and Beyond. She's the director of creative writing at Binghamton University. Within her work, particularly in Hybrida, Chang plays with form in what the Harvard Review describes as a stunning investigation of what textual form is and what it can do. Her readers are thrilled by the diversity of her poems, and with words that defy gravity and definition. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Tina Chang.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And thank you, Falk. I'm so happy to be back because the last time I was here was when the world was so different. And so I want to thank Kelly Groom for first inviting me into the Falk family, and then also David Simpson, Sarah Siegel, Kelly Groom, of course, and Maddie. Thank you so much. I heard Maddie did a paper on one of my book, and I'm so honored, and that's always a beautiful surprise to hear when someone comes up to me in these such diverse spaces to tell me things like that. So I appreciate it so much. So I am largely going to be reading from this collection called Hybrida. And I can say about it that when I first had my son, Roman, and my daughter, Juliet, who you'll see wandering about here somewhere on the grounds, I re-examined my own identity along with his father's, along with our families. They are Asian American and also Haitian American because my husband hails from Haiti. And since their birth, we walk through the complexities and the joy of what our collective identities understand. And the joy of writing the book Hybrida is that I delved into what it means to love someone most fully and completely, and the difficulty was dealing with issues such as appropriation and ensuring I was only talking about my own identity in my own skin and as a mother. It was that language of parenthood and protection that governed this book. A mother could love someone so deeply, but was the world ready to watch out, care for, and protect a boy of color, which is one of the main questions in the book. For years, I pondered creating the book while caring for my children, nursing, doing laundry, doing dishes. Everybody in the room probably knows what I mean. And I hesitated in writing the book. So I think that one of the reasons I hesitated, it felt like such a steep hill to climb and the subject's too complex. But Hybrida continued to call to me. It was at a residency very similar to this that I spoke to my challenges to my peers, and that the title of the book came into being, and then everything sort of started after that. And in many ways, it's also a love letter to creative communities such as this one. I can say that one of the other things that really started me with the energy to write it is a lot of people say, well, how did it actually start? How did this project actually begin? And I was reading lots of fairy tales to my children, in particular Grimm's fairy tales. I don't know why those stories are shared because Grimm's fairy tales are very grim. And so I think that in reading those stories, these figures that kept coming back again and again, the wolf, the witch, and the predators that are in these books kept coming back and again. And I continuously asked myself, who are these predators in modern day life? And sometimes they were authority figures meant to be there to protect us. So this is sort of what started the whole journey with Hybrida. And I'll read to you now from it. Can you hear me well enough? Later on, I'll have a projection. I feel like that'll make me feel a lot better when I can project the poem and we can all sort of share in the experience of how I wrote that poem. I'll start off with he pronoun. Everywhere I look, I see him. I have a right to fear for him, though I have no right to claim his color. His blackness is his to own, and what will my mouth say of that sweetness? Am I colorless, worn like a veil, invisible but present? He is a word grown upright, and some claim he is journalism, media around me, so much light filtered through, so much video of him, I shut it out. The body shot through, and I will not let him out the door. Sideways, I view a lens, If you could see the green field, the cows with their maternal gazes, instinct at their hooves, leaning into calves, edging in, they come closer. When there's no more color, I turn an old-fashioned knob of the TV, black and white frames, where I view a hose releasing water, dogs bark at the leash of time. My son turns off the television, believing it's an ancient toy. He sits on my lap, and we lean against the wall, he and I in the room. We watch the door. So there is a great focus on children. One of the things that I notice as I get to sort of travel the country talking about the book is there is a kind of a quieting of this language of parenting and motherhood. And much of me writing the book, too, is to try to place that language forward. I said in one line of the book that the language of motherhood is oftentimes muted, mangled, and isolated. And part of writing this book was also to place that language forward as a valid language, because it is so much a part of all of our lives. Either everyone had to have a mother at some point to have been birthed. So this is a language that we all speak. And there are many books. I was just thinking about all the books of motherhood. And if you're interested, Rachel Zucker has a book called Motherhood, and there's a beautiful anthology called The Long Devotion, which is all various poets participating in this anthology, and the main language is motherhood. This next poem is called Milk. It focuses on a young boy who was 8 years old, and he asked his parents if he could walk by himself home alone. It's still something I struggle with, even in this beautiful place. I still struggle. Can you go out on your own? So he asked his parents enough times that his parents finally gave in. He lived in Brooklyn, New York, so they were concerned that the streets were dangerous, but they practiced the path home. They thought that he got it, and then on the day that he was let out of school, instead of turning left, he turned right. He asked a stranger for directions home, and he never made it home alive. So I thought about this boy for a long time, and a lot of me writing this book was resisting writing the book, resisting these stories that I found to be incredibly sad. What was I contributing to the overall conversation? And then I was reading a book called In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak. Does anybody know this book? I love this book. It was my daughter's favorite book. She asked me to read it to her every single night. And there is a line that goes, milk in the batter, we bake cake and nothing's the matter. Milk. In every definition of home, my son conjures milk. The sun is milk. Milk spills through open doorways, bed of warm milk, face of milk, milk trousers, a truck full of milk. A milky light passes through the lens of my camera. All of his young life, my son thought of milk, and he asked for it each night. In every memory I have of him, his hands are outstretched, and he's asking for his last bottle. In every version of a life, I never refuse him. On the television, the nation listens to the story of Labi Kletsky. Today, I think of his mother, who waited for him, allowing him for the first time to walk home alone. That morning, he held a key, heavy and shining, made especially for him. In the ancient story of boys, he headed up the street, past the lone dog barking near the fire hydrant, past the circle of children careening into their own shadows. In the ancient story of boys, he walked through his front door, and this was his rite of passage. He placed the book bag on the coffee table, and the boy and the mother sat together in the large reading chair in the living room light. But this version isn't true. Tonight, I hold my son closer. As I put on his night clothes, I'm afraid of the world. I find all the stories horrifying. In the book of nursery rhymes, the old woman sends her son to bed without food. A king beats a knave for stealing pies, and the dog cannot find his bone, though he runs in circles day after day. Perhaps if I rewrite all the old stories, a new era will begin, era of the forgiven, era of redemption, era of safekeeping. Tonight, milk stains my blouse, a love so deep it runs from me. After the old stories are finished, my son says, the story again. I open the book. The owls lift from the pages. The lake is a bowl of night milk. And this, a place so safe, we are weightless, buoyant in its murky sweetness, free from a promise that each new day startles us alive. Maybe I'll read one more poem before I project some images, and we can look at some beautiful images together and talk about it. I'll read, let's see. Okay. I was invited to participate in this wonderful anthology called The Kiss. And The Kiss is a beautiful gift to give anybody because it's all just focused on that, kisses. And so I just thought, oh gosh, how am I going to write? I was invited to submit, and I thought, how am I going to submit anything that isn't completely saccharine and overdone and over the top? So again, a lot of this book was about refusal. So I refused to write the piece until the editor, Brian Turner, came to me again. He said, it's time. It's time to submit something right now. Nothing like a deadline to really push you forth, which is what this whole week is about. So I thought about all the different kinds of kisses there are. There's the first kiss, the makeup kiss, and the last kiss, which is what Brian Turner had wrote about. He, after reading his book, his piece was about his wife being ill, and it was about the last kiss that he ever gave to her. So after that, I was like, oh, I can't go on. I can't write anything. But he persisted. So this is what came out of it. This is called Revolutionary Kiss. Can you hear me well? I just want to make sure, because one of my students had mentioned that it was hard to hear. So Revolutionary Kiss. I had never created man before, so I invented my son first as a dream body. In order to create the dream body, I must first believe in the force of opposites, a terrible tension of what has existed and the struggle yet to come. And it is true that at a notion of him, for many years, for generations, my imagination traveled in search of him. It seems unlikely that a kiss would have its roots in the Haitian Revolution, but it does. Over a century ago, an uprising of hundreds of thousands of slaves freed themselves from chain and rope, from whip and guillotine, from the bondage to the struggle of blood. They fought for 13 years in a revolution to stand on the shores of their own land, newly named Haiti, as free people, and they kissed the ground, however damp with the blood of their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sons. Slaves, newly liberated, whispered my son's name. His body envisioned there, beneath the rust of shackles, beneath the shards of slave owners' homes, rising with the smoke from burned plantations, past the pinnacle of scoured light, past the canopy of trees dripping with the uprising of future leaves. My son begins his journey to me. Once there was a chain of kisses, as my mother said goodbye to her brothers and sisters lined in a row as she left Taiwan for America, a shock of lace around her neck as she waved to a country of ghosts. Her history was equally as complex. She left China in 1949 before communists led by Chairman Mao took over mainland China. My mother crowded into a boat that would take her to the coast of Taiwan, known as the Beautiful Island, which she would one day yearn to leave. By foot, by boat, by train, by bus, by plane, it seems impossible these two histories intertwine so that one day I may find a dream body housed inside mine. All along, I wring my hands and worry. Will I know how to mother him? What language will I speak? Will my mother abandon me, turn the portraits of my ancestors toward the walls, backs directed away from my longing? When I woke, the doctor's voice was muffled and thick. My mind moved in syncopated pulses, and I pushed until all the energy drained and my body cracked open. Liquid gold rushed away, finally and now. He arrived, a purpled creature, violet and squirming, face crushed into an emperor's expression. Born from the urgency of immigrants, how futile all my years of worrying. I should have known my boy would row his boat to me, regardless of the sky above that shook down its lightning. And even if the ground was bruised and famished of fruit and even freedom, he would continue on as if a force were lulling him to bedrock. Right here, between his eyebrows, there is a swell of light, a country where I belong, no longer a stranger to my own skin. My mouth to his temple, an alarm cries. Tanks roll through the tail squeaking, turning their heavy wheels. When I kiss him, history's weapons fall from my pockets, shields cast beneath Atelia trees. I will now end my days of resistance, my lips searching the entirety of his dream face made mortal, my lost shadows now migrating in unison. Now I'll show you some pictures. Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, okay. So let's talk. Raise your hand if you know who this is. Most of the people in the room probably know who this is. Okay. So like a quarter, half probably. This is Kehinde Wiley's work, which actually I had the pleasure to see his work actually at the Brooklyn Museum a couple of years ago. And this was placed side by side with the original work, Napoleon Crossing the Alps. So the work represented it'll be like a cool art lesson, just in case you don't know his work, many of you do. So the work presented in Kehinde Wiley's A New Republic raises questions about race, gender, and the politics of representation by portraying contemporary African-American men and women using conventions of traditional European portraiture, and hopefully you remember the original portrait. Wiley's portraits of everyday men and women riff on specific paintings by old masters, replacing the European aristocrats depicted in those paintings with contemporary Black subjects, drawing attention to the absence of African Americans from historical and cultural narratives. The subjects in his paintings often wear sneakers, hoodies, and baseball caps, gear associated with hip-hop culture, and are set against contrasting, ornate, decorative backgrounds that evoke earlier eras. So at first I was wondering if I should share the actual poem with you and have it projected, but if you're a poet in the room, we spend so much time just on the enjambment. Why not enjoy the enjambment? I mean, how many people in the room just take just all day long correcting, moving around a period or a comma or that fragment over here? So that's what I spent most of my time doing until it became the text the way it seems right now. I was also inspired by recently doing a reading with Ilya Kaminsky, and he was able to project all of his poems, and I love that. I love that we can include everyone in that, to be able to see the poem itself. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, because I thought it was a perfect balance, Andrea, between you and I, because I go long, as you notice. Andrea is short, and it's a perfect balance. So this is called Four Portraits. And if you don't mind scrolling through the poem as I read it, I would really appreciate it. I never dreamed myself to be any larger than a horse. Perhaps this is strange, my girl body in the body of a man on a rapturous equestrian animal. I am not like the others. This was the song I sang since my birth, since I had a mouth to sing it. So I said it for years until I believed jewels fell out of my mouth. O son, I believe the mighty shall come. I shall be a mother, too, whose bright milk runs with fever and anguished love, with a head in my hands, if the head shall equal justice. I shall be a father, too, glorious and eternal. I shall be for you the man ascending the cliff, until the steed I ride throws me into a pasture of the everlasting. If this is blasphemy, let me love the world in two fantastic horses, ride them to a distant country, where I drown in brocade and fragrant vine. If I'm captured, let my kingdom be laced in mega gold. Let my cage be a godly frame. And I think I'm going to skip, Sarah, to the last image, to the Kara Walker image. And probably a lot of you also know Kara Walker's work as well. So Kara Walker utilizes, this whole series is called Emancipation Approximation, and Kara Walker utilizes the Victorian craft of black paper cutouts to pose provocative questions about race in America, and her silhouettes highlight the way that stereotypes obscure complex histories. So, as I said, Emancipation Approximation, it was actually a series of 27 screen prints, and it's a very ironic interpretation of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. and her artwork deals with subjects of racism and sexism, and her stories are open-ended and forces each viewer to interpret them to confront America's very, very complex past and their legacies. This one I called Woman Beneath a Woman. Each breath makes me a billow, worn like rain, spiraling out into a vision of winter. If history teaches me anything, it is about the vagaries of burden. I can carry a vessel, a pitcher of water, a bundle of ideas like sticks. I carry time like fire. I hiccup, and it's 2018, though the faces are the same, faces without faces and with different names. If I run, the threat of a storm above slows me. If I lift my arms, the rain spills down. If I bend, my spine becomes a terrain on which another treads. Sometimes I wish to unborn myself from this weather. If I could walk from under this thunder, there would be such air. My posture too would lift. If I unborn myself, I'd give up my sisters too, my brothers by the bridge. So I'll stay lifting this largeness, this tonnage of darkness, to live inside my cloud of kin. And I think I'll just read one more poem, and then I'll show you one last image before I end. This one is called, let me just tell you about the poem very briefly. So after the Michael Brown and Eric Garner verdicts, I was feeling like rage, just rage that the lives of a boy and a man were just taken away, and we are expected to just move forward in time. And also it was a story that was not new. So I didn't even know how to cope with my rage, and like the earlier Libby Kletsky poem, I didn't want to write a poem about something that was told already, and about a story that was somebody else's story. That was very important to me during the writing of the book. But I couldn't shake this feeling that I had. I call this fury. Fury. My son rubs his skin and names it brown, his expression gleeful as I wipe a damp cloth over his face this morning. Last night, there were reports that panthers were charging through the streets. I watch from my seat in front of the television, a safe vista. I see the savannah. Sometimes, though, my son wakes to a kind of nightmare. He envisions words on the wall and cannot shake them. He tries to scratch them away or runs out of the room, but the words follow him. None of it makes any sense, but it's the ghost of his fear that I fear. What is a safe distance from the thoughts that pursue us, and what if the threat persists despite our howling? Buildings collapse. A woman falls down the stairs and lands on her back with only one eye open, half awake to her living damage. I think my son senses what's happening on the street, his heart fiercely tethered to mine. I know the world will find him and tell him the history of his skin. Harm will come searching for him and pour into him its scorching mercury, its nails, its bitter breath against his boyhood skin, still smelling of milk and wonder. Somewhere, the panthers are running, starting fires fueled by a distinct hunger. Somewhere, there is a larger fire, a pyre stoked by the fury of all that we've come to understand, all that we could have done but did not. Its flames lick the underside of the earth. It propagates, needing only a frenzy of air to fan it to inferno. I'll call that the forest. The deep woods are ahead, and if the panthers could just reach it. If I told you that all of this happens at night, you wouldn't believe me. If I told you that all of this happens in the future, always the future, you would continue following the scent you could only describe as smoke. I'll call that justice. But aren't we talking about mercy and its dark twin? Isn't that what's pummeling history on the side as I write this? Isn't it the thorn and the taser? Isn't it the chokehold and the gold arm of vengeance? I say it from my mouth, and when it spills forth, it lands on the ground in a pool of light, reflecting back at me the one true blasphemy. Love, and love, and love, and love, and love. And love is crowding the street and needs only air, and it lives over there in the distance, burning. I'm so glad my son walked in, because this is the last, that if you could project that. He told a lot better to me this afternoon, because I said, Roman, can you remind me What were we thinking about when you created this? So once I wrote the book, my son said, "Mom, don't you think that the words should maybe really end on my words, since so much of the book is dedicated to me and focused on me? I would love to be able to say something at the end." So he was actually really focused on, he was really into graphic novels, end of the world kind of scenarios that 11, 12, 13-year-olds are really, really into. And so he created a longer narrative that was then, he reminded me, it was like a longer story that was then it came down to, then we sort of took out the lines and it came down to this poem. And so the images are, it's set in the future where there's only eye recognition at that point. And then the young figure of the boy slash alien actually walks into a room, changes into another kind of skin, and then comes out into the world. And actually the slide is not accurate because the outside figures are white and the inner figures within the question mark are black, are colored black, and it says, "Who am I?" And my son's final words were, if the book are, "I come back in the secret room, slip into a skin, and walk out, blended in with the world." Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Another hand for Tina Chang and Andrea Cohen.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes, okay.
Any questions for our amazing poets, faculty members, and friends?
Is it okay if I start? Sometimes it just takes a person to, I have a question for you. So I noticed that one of the compliments, the differences among my work is you had described your work as being shorter, and the poems being short. What drew you to shorter forms?
I don't know that anything drew me to the shorter poems. I think that one of the ways that my mind works, if it does work at times, is to take a small an idea and roll it around in my head, I guess, and then it sort of just comes out that way. And so those small poems generally are enter the world pretty much that way. Yeah, yeah. And so I will ask you. I won't ask you about the length, but I will ask you about the coupling of images and text, and how that sort of has evolved for you.
You mean the images that some of the images that I showed? I think a lot of the images were about a conversation that I wanted to have. So much of the space that I was writing in, if we felt sort of insular and isolated during this period of time, during the pandemic, I think motherhood definitely did a number to me as well. As anybody who knows, who sort of has been through it, it was a very isolating period for me at first, especially in the first few years of just doing my chores, nursing, my entire life was just dedicated to them. In order to walk into this larger conversation, it seemed really imperative that I search for other art forms that I could collaborate with, and also there were also forms of prompts. They forged a new kind of relationship with the feelings that I had. I was actually just really lucky because when I approached Kehinde Wiley, when I approached Kara Walker, I guess I was feeling at the moment, I was taking a big risk because I thought to myself, what if they don't collaborate back? What if they don't want to have me respond to their work? And a large part of that was just creating the work first, taking a long time to actually create the work, and then approaching the artist to see if they would want to respond back to me in that way. And I was actually extremely surprised that they were so positive about wanting to speak back to my work as well and wanting their work involved in this kind of process. So a large part of incorporating images, which actually we'll do tomorrow in my class, is so much about process. I think also when I was searching and looking for artists who were speaking to me at the moment, I also felt like I was engaging with a language that I didn't necessarily had to get perfect and correct. So knowing visual artists in these kinds of spaces and residency spaces, especially visual artists, I noticed that they had this beautiful process. So they were so physical about their work, and that physicality and a different kind of language about their process was entering into mine, allowing me to be able to make mistakes, to correct myself, to be able to then re-engage in the conversation again. So I think all of that work with images, and especially the artists themselves, really helped in that regard. David. David has a question. David?
Sure. For Andrea, I've always had a real fondness for the little ones, for the aphorism, for the epitaph, and I'm wondering how you think about the lyric poem. I wouldn't call your poems aphoristic, but they're close.
Yeah.
How you think about the lyric poems difference from something like the aphorism.
Can you repeat the question just so that everybody
Sure.
can hear it?
The question is how I think of the lyric poem as maybe being different from the aphoristic poems that I'm doing, which are those really, really small ones. And I don't think of a big difference, really. I think that it's smaller, but in the spirit is the same, really. So at one extreme, I'm doing those really tiny ones, and then my extreme, which is not so extreme, really, is a poem like the one about my dad, 11, and which works in an associative way. And then somewhere in the middle is probably a kind of, I think it's sort of a hybrid between lyric and narrative, because I'm not sure what I would call it, because it feels like a lyric poem, but it's telling a story too. So I don't think so much about what kind of a poem it is. I'm just aware of the poem that happens, really.
Well, I asked that because the effect is a little different, but to me, the aphorism sort of shuts down.
Mhm.
It becomes a takeaway tidbit of knowledge, and there's something about your poems, even the little bitty ones, that open up in this sort of wide, enlarging way. That seems to me maybe a distinction between that lyric and the sort of foreclosure of an aphorism. I don't know.
Well, I would say thank you. I would hope it would be an opening and not just a sort of pithy nugget. Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like there was a question. There was a question over here.
Yeah, for Tina, I'm curious about, I mean, I know you spoke to the demand for hybridity within this collection, given the circumstances of genealogy and of colonialism and the way that that has been like encountered in your own life. But I was curious about maybe other texts that you might have kind of like looked to within the that realm of hybridity that might have been helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think probably one of the more difficult things when I started to write it is that this idea that I hadn't really seen anything like it before. I definitely think that there were some associations drawn between sometimes this book and Citizen because of some of the themes, but also I wouldn't even approach that because I don't really necessarily see those similarities at all because they're completely two different books, and Claudia's book is really such a work of genius. and also something that I'd never seen before. So I think that I was actually looking toward a lot of visual artists during this time. I was basically looking toward other art forms outside of poetry and allowing those art forms to be able to inspire me. I was also looking toward the East. I was looking toward other forms such as the Zuhitsu, which I've become incredibly in love with. It is probably arguable, but the poet Kimiko Han is said to have brought this form to the United States and popularized it in her book called The Narrow Road to the Interior, which is one of my favorite books, and that served definitely as a huge inspiration. In terms of, I loved how an Asian form was a female form as well. I love the empowerment of that because so many of the forms that I had personally learned when I was studying in college and even throughout my MFA were male forms. They were European forms, and it was just kind of, instilling in me more of the kind of sort of my own invisibility, or that I should sort of mute myself because I didn't see myself reflected in any of those forms. So a lot of the hybridity was sort of searching for the forms that were out there that spoke to me. And Zuhitsu, my students will learn about it this week. They don't know, but we're actually in the midst of creating it because I asked them to go out and collect a lot of things today that we use the word vibrate. And they said, "Are you sure you mean vibrate?" I'm like, I mean something that you can touch that creates a kind of feeling through your body. So they're in the midst of collecting things for what will be a Zuhitsu by the end of the week. And the Zuhitsu can incorporate anything. The Zuhitsu is derived from the word that really means running brush or following the brush. Japanese courtesans used to sleep with a book under the pillow. And then when they took this book out from under the pillow after they woke up, the sense of the dream and anything that was sort of at the top of their imagination would be placed in these pillow books. And the Zuhitsu is very much derived from that same kind of feeling of lists. Anything that doesn't belong in any other poem, lists, dreams, journalism, all forms of language that you think that are not supposed to speak to each other belong in the Zuhitsu. So that was probably a main form of inspiration in terms of hybridity and looking at different hybrid forms for the book.
When you talked about getting permission for the collaboration, did you see the art, separately write your poem, send your poem, and ask if it could appear on a page of your book, and the collaboration was the agreement? Or did they answer you in their art form or in learning yours?
Yeah, so during that time when I was looking for these forms of conversation, I was just looking for artwork that, I don't even know if I was really actively searching, to be honest with you. I think I would see these images that had just as when we're looking at any form of art or when we're watching dance, listening to music, there was a kind of sensation that I needed and wanted to answer to it. I would start, just in terms of thinking about process, I would then write the poem. And it's a big risk too, because you're writing the poem thinking, this could go nowhere. And I think that's the space that we're always writing in, right? It could absolutely go nowhere. I would say maybe 90% of my poems don't go anywhere, but I don't know, where's that space on our laptops where everything kind of gets forgotten, this like kind of hole where everything lands. So I didn't know when I was writing the poems also to another artist named Sondra Perry who does video installations, whether or not they were actually going to honestly give me the time of day because I admired them so much as artists. So then I would write the poems, go through many, many different versions of it, sweating it out, thinking, okay, I'm going to submit it to this artist, communicating with them. They asked me a couple of questions about my work and what I was thinking about in relationship to the poem that I submitted to them, and then was very happy to have me have the image along with the poem appear in my book. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, because what happens is that form of collaboration gave me courage to do more for future work, to believe that kind of relationship could occur, and then to ask myself, well, for the next collection, what would the next step be? Probably taking even more of those steps to be able to further converse, and what would that look like? You know, so there's always these question marks when I'm making something. It's a great question.
You were inspired, took a leap of faith, and you got a yes.
Yes, you're very good at the summary. I probably could have said that. Yes, leap of faith, yes, conversation, yes again. We need those yeses sometimes, right? Because I thought that for sure the answer was going to be no. Or what kept me back from writing the book was sort of like this idea that there would be outrage. Even in talking to my husband about the book, he's like, you're taking some risks. I'm like, what is writing? What is art if not taking risks? I said I could take a really big risk that, you know, the book could just be rejected, but I thought if I just stay in my own voice, there's really only 2 times where I'm not in my own voice, where I'm actually writing a persona poem in the voice of my son. And one was before his birth, before he's born, like sort of in utero, and then the other poem is sort of way far into the future, an imaginary time that's, you know, could be the year 3000. It's just like way, way in the future. And those are the only 2 times that I kind of took a liberty to say, am I allowed now? Am I allowed to inhabit his voice? And even still then, I thought, maybe not, I don't know. And to ask too, this is where the audience comes in too, to sort of ask for their response, to ask for their conversation with me as well. So this is the kind of book that called on that.
Very funny. I'm sorry. I hope you all heard that. It bears repeating. So I would say, as a kid, I attempted to be the class clown, and I was thinking about this today. When I got out of graduate school, I didn't write poetry for 2 years. I wrote very long, very bad stories, and we'll get to those in a little while. There were 2 things I thought you couldn't do in poetry. One was dialogue, and the other was humor. And then I realized, oh yeah, you can do both of those things in poetry. And the humor just kind of comes naturally in the poems. And then there is the balance with the darker stuff, right? And so they work together. And I feel there's very much a place for it. And I guess I also, I mean, poetry has been my life, really, and it just sort of happened that way. But I like a good laugh as well. So yeah. People probably want to eat dinner. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Eileen and Andrea. Tina and Andrea. Sorry. Remember, we have another event tomorrow night with Eileen Miles and Matthew Olsman. Remember, there are books for sale at the back. Tina and Andrea will sign books at the back, and take a look at the merchandise while you're at it and the gallery. And remember to sign up for Writers' Night, Student Night is across the hall, across the deck in the lounge. So if you haven't signed up yet, I encourage you to do so. Another big hand for Tina and Andrea.